Good morning. This is the SEPS and BIM Department Update webinar. My name is Kimon Onuma from Onuma Inc. This is a project of the National Institute of Building Sciences for the Department of Veterans Affairs. We'll be starting momentarily. Let me start off with a YouTube video that is just went public last week, and this is accessible on the website as well, so I won't play the whole thing. But it's basically an high-level overview of why this is even being done at VA. For the first time, we're actually showing how the data from the space and equipment planning system can be connected to building information modeling for projects. Today's webinar is about the department update consultants and their work of updating the standards that go back into SEPS and the use of BIM in those standards. But ultimately, the resulting data and BIMs will be used for actual projects. And this video actually does a good job of giving an overview of how that works and what the intent of all this is. So let's get started with the webinar. And I'll pause this video. You can always go back to it. There's quite a few videos online about this already. So just to give a baseline of where this all comes from, on the VA Technical Information Library, there are several pages I'd like to highlight. One is there's a new link in the project software requirement page that takes you to this page here, which is the SEPS to BIM Introduction and Guidelines. This link down here for part 1 and part 2 is what we're going to be covering today. It's a series of PowerPoint and PDF slides about this process. The introductory video is at the top here, and down toward the bottom there are technical training videos, about 1 minute to 2 minutes each. You can watch those later, and please watch this site because this will be updated as new material is available. So if we go back to the the main page of the TIL, on the TIL, as many of you know, there are design guides, for example, PG 1812. If you go to the PG 1812 page, there's a list of design guides based on the departments, and these are part of what the deliverable is from the department update architects and consultants. And one thing about these guides that we'd like to highlight is the fact that this is a typical guide. You basically have a lot of sections with information about this particular department. And most importantly, there's a lot of subject matter expertise and effort that obviously goes into assembling the decisions that go into these design guides. So VA staff, consultants, clinical staff that give input on what should go into these design guides. A lot of very important decisions that ultimately end up in the criteria and SEPS, and ultimately obviously into the actual projects that VA works on for healthcare facilities. And if you look at one section of this design guide, you'll see, for example, this typical room. This is a typical DNTG1 dental treatment room, and obviously this was BIM. As an architect, we all know that building information modeling is pretty much becoming the de facto way of managing projects, even a simple project like this of a single room. And that's essentially what we're talking about today. It's really how do we, as a VA, require BIM to be used to create a standard way of deliverable from the department update architects and engineers. So these BIMs are intended not only for the production of the final documents, but to actually watch the process evolve and to capture the decisions and to confirm that the data is aligned with the graphics. And that's obviously the strength of BIM. So when you have a floor plan like this with a list of equipment, this is pretty much it. It's pretty as basic as you can get as far as BIM goes. It's a room. No construction information. It's basically a container, a box with stuff inside it, with equipment inside it, and the basic layout of that equipment that can then be used obviously to create elevations and plans and isometrics and lists. And part of it also is a list of equipment. This could be done in Excel obviously or in Word, but from BIM, a project like this a file like this can actually generate the list of equipment. And as many of you know, the list of equipment also have IDs called JSN numbers that track individual pieces of equipment. And you'll see more of this in the instructions as we go along. So essentially, the material that's already being produced, regardless of using BIM, is essentially what we're asking to be put into a format that is consistent. So it's not any new type of information. It's essentially just confirming that this information is in a format that is digital and in BIM. And the bulk of the work of actually creating these files is not in the actual production of the CAD or the BIM files. It's actually the decisions that are being made. So a room like this, we've actually tested over 200 of these ourselves as part of this project. Within a few minutes, 10, 20, 30 minutes, you can actually lay out a room if you have the equipment available and if you have the decisions made, obviously. So that's the actual mechanics of using BIM are trivial in many ways for a project like this. Okay, so let's get started. There are two parts to this, and we will go through them piece by piece here. There is a part 1 instructions for the guidelines for creating the BIM templates. So this is part 1. So as a baseline, VA is now requiring a BIM process to be used for all updates of planning and design standards. There's already a VA BIM guide for projects, and now we're asking that the same happens for the updating of the planning and design standards that go into SEPs ultimately. And the BIM template process will go into the details of this, but essentially VA will be providing 3 different file types to the consultants. Number 1 is an Excel room and content list that's output from SEPs. Number 2 is all available Revit family objects. In other words, there's a list of objects, almost 1,000 of them by the end of this month that will be available. There's already 900 and something right now. And number 3 is all available BIM templates as individual files, and these happen to be in Revit format. So individual rooms, an exam room is a Revit file with the use of these objects. And the department update AE is to update these 3 items and submit them back to VA, and also use them as part of the process. In other words, they're not expected only as a deliverable at the end, but in reviews. There are reviews in these department updates that happen that have discussions about what goes inside a room and what equipment should go and what the layout of the room is. BIM and data should be used all along this process. So it's not just a tool to produce the final documents. And the intent of that you'll see why we're asking that, because it makes it easier to have very specific discussions about equipment and spaces and the data about the equipment and spaces. So let's go piece by piece here. So the Excel and templates from VA, the Excel files, there are 2 Excel files. One is a room Excel file, a list of rooms, and another one is a content, equipment inside those rooms. This will be provided by VA to the department update AEs, or if you have access to the space and equipment planning system, this is actually an export from SEPs, and it's been there for quite a while. This is in the criteria section of SEPs, for those of you that are familiar with SEPs. The Excel list essentially is all the rooms that VA uses and all the departments. So if you're working on a specific department, you can see the current default values, what's called the master tables of what's the previously developed department requirements and spaces associated with that department, and the previously developed content Excel file, the equipment in those spaces. So you'll be receiving those, and your task is to use these Excel files exactly as they are and update them to match the design guide updates and deliver them back to VA. The room codes and the JSN object numbers need to be maintained in order for VA to keep track of the data and changes throughout the department update process. The Excel files are a direct output from SEPs and reflect the current default standards for these rooms and content. Obviously, departments are going to be updated, new rooms might even be added, or new content might be added, but this is the current known default, and the intent is to build upon that. The third thing that you will receive are the Revit family objects aligned with the DoD Mill Standard 1691. VA has cataloged all these. This is a shared library of objects between the Department of Defense Health Agency that were originally built by the Corps of Engineers and now have been added to. So there are approaching 1,000 of these objects now. There were about 800 or 900 in the last few months, and each subsequent department update will have several new objects added to these. And these are available already online. There's a link from the VA TIL site as well. And the intent is to share these objects with DHA. So your task as the consultant is to use these Revit families as part of the department update, insert them into the spaces, and build missing ones that might be needed if a new department a new space with a new equipment that doesn't exist in this library is needed, a new X-ray piece of equipment, for example, and we'll go through that in the other slides. The other file that you will receive, and these are all online as well too, and these are being updated even over the next few months. There are going to be updates to these, but these are the Revit BIM templates matching the SEPS VA room codes. So the current known BIM template, the templates, the rooms that match a one-to-one match with SEPS. In other words, if SEPS says there's an exam room with 30 pieces of equipment in it, this is the exact same room that matches SEPS. These are available online as well. You can download them, and new ones are being added over the next month or two as well. And your task is to use the existing Revit BIM templates as guides to build new ones, or to also just review and confirm that the recommendations of the department update match what is in this template. So the rooms identified for guide plates in your department update are to be updated or modified with these templates. So the steps are, if you go to SEPS and the Excel file that we talked about earlier, if an exact match to your department and function room exists in SEPS, use that room. So if an exam room exists and it's a one-to-one match, obviously there's no change required and you use that as is. If the content and layout matches. If an exact match is not found in SEPS and a new room is required, for example, a new toilet needs to be created, instead of a TLTS2 or 3, there needs to be a TLTS2 10, for example, and you're creating it as part of your department, you would define the new room layout and either edit the existing BIM room templates or even create a new one and note the differences in the Excel file. If no similar room exists, you enter a new room criteria in Excel and create a new BIM room template. It's actually pretty basic. The concept is that SEPS has a set of standards of rooms and equipment inside it. If you're going to be recommending a new room type as part of your department, it's basically here's a new room or here's an existing room that needs new equipment in it. It's basically a bucket with stuff inside it, and we're asking to confirm what gets changed or if new information gets added. And what we found, and this is so important because we found even in recent department updates, there are inconsistencies between the list in Excel in the design guides and in the plans. Small inconsistencies sometimes, or in many cases in the older department updates, you'll see pretty large inconsistencies because obviously if you're doing things manually and trying to coordinate this data across plans and elevations and lists, inconsistencies get developed. So we want the Excel file to be used as a baseline to say each submittal to VA will include these two Excel files and any changes will be noted in the Excel file. So if you add a piece of equipment to a room, or if you add a new room, or if you take a piece of equipment out, or if you propose a new room, basically it's a simple line item in the Excel file. Okay, so let's go through these Excel files piece by piece. So the content tracking Excel file is the first one. Column A through D is what comes out of SEPS for the content. So we're seeing a waiting area, WRCO1 here, for example, and a playroom, PLA1. And the content inside it, column A says here is the JSN numbers of the equipment that goes into the waiting room. And in the waiting room, there's several chairs and different types of equipment. What we're asking for you to do is to add two new columns, column E and F. Column E is a status column, and column F is a new Revit family column. So the status column is essentially to track any changes that happen to the default value. So if a recommendation is being made to change the WRCO1 with an additional piece of equipment, you would need to put in the status column added. So if a new piece of equipment is added, you mark it as added. If it's removed, you mark it as removed. And if there's even a quantity change, if you're changing it from 1 to 3, for example, or 2 to 1, we want it noted there as a change. So the status column is a quick way of scanning and seeing what changes are being proposed to that room. And that becomes a very specific discussion between you as a consultant and the VA project manager of, can we change the content in this default WRCO1, and obviously there are implications beyond this department because these spaces are used in other departments as well, but that becomes a design decision at that point in time. In addition to that, As we mentioned before, there's a lot of objects that already are available in the Revit families. In fact, the 800 or 900 out of the several thousand in the Mill Standard 1691 actually cover a big bulk of the default, the most used objects in the templates. But if you're designing a new room type in your department or adjusting it, and you need a piece of equipment that does not exist in that Revit in the Revit families, we are asking you to create a simple object and mark it with a name, saying we're adding a rack magazine wall-mounted F2300 Revit family to this room, and that would be a change as well. So it's very simple. It's basically an Excel file with tracking of what changed and a marking of any new Revit family that's created. The next Excel file is a room tracking Excel file. As we mentioned, this initially comes out of SEPs. It will be either provided to you by VA, or if you have access to SEPs, you can generate it on the fly yourself. This is the current known default master tables from SEPs that defines the currently known VA standards for what spaces go in what department and what functional areas. So you would take this and scroll down to the department that you're updating, and that's really your main concern right there. And this again, column A through P is what comes out of the Excel file from SEPs. We're asking you to add two new columns that you see on the right side. Again, a status column and a name or a mark that shows that a new BIM template is going to be created for that space. So this is all about the spaces. So reception, for example, in the second row, if the default area is changed, so we change reception from 150 square feet to 125 square feet, we want that noted in the status, so area has been changed. And if a BIM template is going to be created for that room, with the VA project management team, if a decision is made to create a design guide and a BIM template, then we want that marked there as well, that this is a BIM template is going to be created for that. If a room is deleted, the same thing, we want it marked as deleted. So any changes to the default spaces that exist in a department need to be marked. And even if you add a completely new space, because that's what happens in a department update, there could be significant changes as well, where you might wipe out half of the spaces and add new spaces in, as one example. So this is just a starting point. The Excel file is a default known value, might have been from 5 years ago, and your task is obviously to update the department. So we need to see those changes marked in the Excel file. Okay, so let's move on to the BIM file itself. So the requirement is to submit one BIM per room back to VA. So every room that's going to be part of the design guide, and this decision is going to be made jointly with the VA project management team, a BIM needs to be created of that room. The room is a template. It's not an actual layout or a design. It's a very simple BIM. It's basically rectangular. We don't want any notches in it. Essentially, it's going to be the right square footage, but it's not a specific design. It's generic with the content in that room. So if the room in SEPs is going to be ultimately 250 square feet and it has 30 pieces of equipment like this, we want to see 250 square foot shape with the equipment inside it. One slab per room, a room code associated it, one BIM per room. From an architect's perspective, this is about as simple as BIM gets. It's basically, literally, this is about, it could be 20, 30-minute exercise, if that, to actually pull this equipment in. The biggest effort usually is in finding the right objects, but obviously we're asking you to use the VA Revit families and the design decisions that made. So the value in the department update is not in the mechanics of creating a BIM, but in actually the decisions and the effort that goes into the month-long process, months or half-a-year-long process of making these decisions. So for all new room spaces that are to be created, and for those that the VA team deems as necessary, a single BIM shall be submitted back to VA. And our recommendation is to use BIM throughout the department update process and not only at the end of the project as a deliverable. All objects except doors and windows shall be Revit families from the 1691 library or newly created families per part 2. We'll go over that next. And we have a sample set of Revit templates that are already available, and many more are going to be coming online. We're approaching about 150 templates out of the 500 or 600 known used rooms in SEPs for VA right now. So these will grow over time. So objects inside the room. This is a unique situation of SEPs defining linear objects. There's a couple of unusual objects in SEPs. Linear objects like curtain tracks and countertops are counted as 1 foot segments. So in this scenario here, if you go into SEPs and pull up this requirement for criteria for this room, it might say 9 segments of curtain track. So in the BIM itself, we actually want to mimic that. So we want, even though this, from a BIM perspective, sometimes this doesn't make logical sense, but this makes sense in terms of how SEPs is used. We want 9 segments of curtains that when are stacked together, you get the correct linear the length of that curtain and of the counter. So these are just unique to that. The objects are in alignment with MIL Standard 1691. MIL Standard 1691 is now a database available publicly online, so you can actually search all the 2,000 objects. And we have the Revit families also cataloged and publicly available online. So let's talk a little bit more about the BIM templates that I mentioned earlier. The BIM templates are to be rectangular orthogonal shape. We do not want notches or L shape. They basically are, here's a square footage. It's within range of what the room is going to look like. The layout, so if it's a square or a rectangle, in this case a rectangle makes sense. And it has to be a one-to-one match. In other words, everything that's in the BIM template has to also appear in the Excel file list of the equipment. One-to-one match exactly. And using BIM tools like Revit, these lists should be automated from the BIM. There's no reason to retype things because we've seen that as well in the previous department updates. You can actually tell that things were manually typed because obviously if you're using Excel and Word and manually typing in lists to match with CAD files or BIM files, and all of a sudden you have inconsistency. So if you use the BIM to actually generate these files, it makes things a lot easier. Another example of the BIM template. On the left side is a BIM template. On the right side this is not a BIM template. This is a sample layout, guide plate that says a BRMS1 can be laid out like this, and it could have a notch in the corner, and this is one option. So in the guide plate, sometimes you see, in fact, this is an example of it, that you see 3 different options for a BRMS1 to confirm that the size and equipment actually makes sense. The template we're asking for is on the left. Now, if you're using BIM for the whole process, you can definitely create the guide plate on the right from the BIM template. Essentially, you duplicate it and you create a version of it. And that's really the power of using BIM. You set up the templates as kind of the seed of the requirements, and you use those to actually start generating the actual guide plates. But the deliverable back to VA for the BIM template process is the file on the left. The file on the right is really more of an output of the process that's used in the PDF guide plates. So here's some more example of guide plates. This is an option, 2 options of the same room, option 1 and 2, or option 1 and 3. This is not what we're asking back as a deliverable for the BIM, but definitely we obviously recommend not having to recreate this manually. You basically duplicate the template and use that as well for these option 1 and 3. And we do not want 2 spaces combined in the template that's being delivered. We just want 1 space. So in this scenario, it would actually be 2 BIM templates, one for BRMS1 and one for TLTS2, not combined like this into 1 template. The guide plates are used to obviously to create the PDFs for the design guide. So the recommendation is these templates can be used as part of the production process. And a little bit of discussion about the level of development. We're calling it level of development 1 through 4. The deliverable we're asking back from you as part of the department update is a level of development 4, which is essentially here's a space and here's equipment arranged in the space in the right position. In some cases, you'll see some red blocks. The red blocks that you see in level of development 1 and 2 are objects that do not exist in the Revit family. So these are the ones that if you were to go to open up a LOD2 room and you're creating the BIM template for it and you see a red block, we would want that red block transformed into an actual Revit family and placed in the room. Level development 3 is what we call the delivery truck method. It's essentially SEP says there's 30 pieces of equipment in the space, and the database can automatically generate a BIM, and you'll see some other tools in subsequent webinars that we are planning on having on how SEPs can automatically generate these spaces even if there's no layout. But the actual LOD4 that you're delivering back is going to be the basis for future projects that actually say, well, we need 20 exam rooms. It'll actually have the layout with the right equipment and position as a starting point and can be used for actual projects. So the deliverables, again, to review are the BIM templates, 1A and 1B. The BIM templates obviously are 2D and 3D view, but it's one object in Revit. The BIM objects in Revit, the Revit families, the Excel files, and the guide plates that have also in the past been obviously delivered. There's no change in that. We still do need the design guide, the guide plates delivered back as PDFs to VA, but obviously the recommendation here is if you're using BIM, this should actually make the guide plate creation a lot smoother because you don't have to go and search for objects and the data is all there. So we're asking for BIM to be used to generate all these deliverables. There are links in the PowerPoint, and I'll point you back to the website later about where to get all of these files. They're all 100% public already, so and there's going to be more posted as well. This is actually the website. It's from the VA TIL. I'll show you how to navigate to that later on as well. Okay, so that's the end of part one. Let's jump to part two, which is shorter. Okay, part two. This is about the creation of the Revit families, the actual objects that need to be created. So the MIL Standard 1691 database is online on max.gov. It's accessible. You can actually search for all these objects now. It used to be that they were distributed in different ways, but now it's web enabled, which is opening up a lot of interesting possibilities of linking to data and a lot of other things that we'll be presenting in future webinars. But these are the objects that the Revit families that are essentially tied to the JSN objects that need to be created. You could read this, download it later and read the details about this. But this is an instruction of how to create new Revit families. So like we described earlier, in this case it's a blue box, but previously it was a red box. But just in the MIL Standard 1691, the data actually says this piece of equipment is 2 feet by 3 feet by 4 feet. Here's a light dental operating ceiling. So it's that bounding box area. That bounding box can be used in BIM to actually for planning exercise and even for reporting, but if you're doing a department update and you need that piece of equipment inside the space that you're working on, your task is to actually build a Revit family to match that object, the geometry, very basic geometry as well. We want you to take that and build the geometry of that and deliver it back to VA. This is important because as a department update AE, you have the subject matter experts assembled, you have the clinical staff assembled, all talking about that piece of equipment. And the building of these objects, the biggest effort actually, even from a technical perspective of building BIM objects like this, is not in the actual mechanics of pulling the shapes together. It's actually in getting the information of how big is this thing, what shape is it, and obviously as the team is assembled, that's the perfect point in time to actually build it. And it actually helps you to validate, does the test fit work? And does the BIM actually make sense? Is the room size right? Does that equipment fit? Because we're seeing in SEPs, if you look in SEPs and you look at the BIMs generated from SEPs, you actually see quite a few spaces developed in the past that obviously the equipment does not fit well in the room. You can see once you have the 3D object that there are issues with that. There are probably a lot of reasons for that. There are things, idiosyncrasies within SEPs, but there's obviously errors that can be seen in past. So we're saying that if we have these objects, not only will it help in the department update process, but obviously they're incredibly valuable for the design process when actual projects get started. So your task is to deliver these model objects back to VA, and we're finding we've gone through about 150 of these BIM template updates in the last month or so ourselves. We're finding that even typical rooms coming out of SEPs, most of the objects are already there. It's about maybe 1 or 2 objects in a space that might be missing typically. In some spaces there might be more, but essentially most of the default objects already exist in the Revit family. And that's the intent, that over time there's going to be less and less of these that need to be built. But as part of your department update process, if you run into an object like this, the instruction is to take that and build that. And the level of development that we're asking back from you is a level of development we're calling C. So level of development A, we're defining it as a 2D symbol. If you're going to Revit, some teams use 2D symbols, obviously to keep the model lightweight and everything. The LOD B, the red bounding box is what I just described. JSN 3320 is 5'8" by 2'4" by 6'8". It'll automatically create from SEPs a block like this in BIM automatically. Nobody has to touch it actually. So these blocks exist for every single object out of the 1691. If you see a block like this in your space, we're asking you to take that block and transform it into LODC. Basically, it's like a cardboard cutout. You notice that the shapes are very, very basic. We want them basic. We don't want it to have a lot of polygons. We don't want it to be identifiable as a specific manufacturer object. We want them to be lightweight as far as low polygon count, simple shapes. And we've gone through about 100 plus of these objects ourselves in the last month, and they're relatively quick to build. It's pretty much from a technical perspective in BIM. It's a very simple object to build. And obviously there's going to be some that are more complex than others, like this chair might be more complex than a boxy piece of equipment on a counter. But overall, we're saying that they should be kept very simple. We do not want a level of detail D object. There are some objects that exist in the current library, about 5%, that are being actually updated right now. We're dropping them down from D to C. They came as default level D from the Corps of Engineers objects that were initially created for the 1691. But your task is to create level of detail C objects and deliver those back to VA. So you'll notice that even at the red block level, the data from the 1691 is still associated with it. So you can't even actually plan with these red blocks, but with a detailed object, it helps in the department update discussions. It helps produce the 2D and 3D documents that need to go into the PG documents. It helps in delivering an object that's going to be reused by VA and by future projects by VA, and to get everybody on the same page about, does this fit inside a space as it's being designed. There are some specific instructions on how to build the origins of these objects. If you give to your Revit BIM teams, they will understand this. It's very, very basic. For example, we do not want the objects to be, I believe it's called hosted. We don't want them hosted to the walls or ceilings. In other words, linked to walls or ceilings. They need to be floating. We don't want the Revit specific hosting option on them. So all the objects that we have right now are non-hosted objects. Okay, so the link files are here, and that's the end of this part of the presentation. Those are the two slide sets. I'll go back to the VA TIL. If you go to the VA TIL, the front page of the VA TIL, and over here on the right, it says Project Software Requirements. If you click on that, it'll bring you to this page. This is a new link here called SEPs to BIM Training, right underneath a VA BIM guide. If you go to the SEPs to BIM Training, you see this, the introductory video that I started showing earlier on, these slides, the part 1 and part 2 slides that we just presented. There's an introductory slide presentation that is similar to the video but shorter, kind of set up as slides with notes on them as well. If you scroll down, there are technical training videos, and we'll be adding more to this, but there are videos about how to work with SEPs on actual projects. And these are pretty interesting because it shows what the result of this department update work is. These templates are not just to deliver the department update. They're actually going to be used for future projects that come out of SEPs. So out of SEPs, if a project comes out and it says, here comes a DNTG1 dental exam room, and in the SEPs project, they might have added another piece of equipment in that room. That piece of equipment is actually going to show up in the BIM. And as we all know, even if you take a clinic, a 50,000 square foot clinic, or let's say 250,000 or 500,000 square foot healthcare facility, a 500,000 square foot healthcare facility coming out of SEPs has over 2 million data points. If you count all the spaces, all the equipment, all the attributes about it. So this is actually within minutes, we're able to show coming out of SEPs to automatically generate BIMs that can be used as a starting point. So nobody has to type anything. Essentially, it's the objects and the templates are going to help the design process and ultimately the VA to be able to have better results on the deliverables and be able to track design as it progresses. So you'll see a lot of this here. The other interesting dynamic that has been happening, which we will present in future webinars, is that now that this data is accessible, SEPs data, what's called web services, accessible by other consultants and vendors, other BIM applications, like for example Trimble with SketchUp, has actually created a version of the Revit family object, so you can actually even use SketchUp to do these layouts. But our requirement at this point in time is that the deliverables are in Revit, but you'll start seeing an interesting dynamic develop as new applications and vendors actually show how they can connect to the SEPs data. So take a look through here. These are about 1-minute videos, and then the training material here. Okay, so that's the end of this presentation session. If there are any questions, feel free to post them in the chat box, and we'll respond if there are any. And since we do not see any questions right now, we will be wrapping up this webinar. We thank you very much for joining us. Please watch the VA TIL website for updated material. My name is Kimon Onuma from Onuma Inc. This is a project with the National Institute of Building Sciences that's been going on for a couple of years, actually, several projects for the SEPs and BIM process. It's a very exciting milestone right now because we're actually getting to the point of linking the SEPs data to BIM, and we look for your participation as consultants to support VA on future department updates in this change that's happening in the BIM deliverables for the department updates. Thank you, everybody that's online, and thank you for your input over the years as we've been going through this process, and we look forward to your participation. We'll be signing off. Thank you very much.